out by the title of the video, today I'll be talking about how I managed to find a flat in Edinburgh, the whole flat hunting process. I'll be showing flat tours, flat prices, and in general like my tips and tricks as someone who has successfully managed to find a flat in Edinburgh. So before I get into the actual flats, I thought I would mention kind of my apartment wish list, the criteria that I had for the flat search, in general, just like some aspects that I really envisioned in my future flat. So the first and probably most important thing was the location. I wanted to have a pretty central location, especially I wanted it to be quite close to my uni building, but also I really liked the idea of having a location next to the meadows. So kind of the areas that we were looking in was Marchmont, Newington, and Old Town area. We also wanted all the rooms in the flat to be a relatively similar size. We didn't want one person to have like a ginormous bedroom and then the other people to have like a shoebox sized room. Now the close proximity to the meadows kind of stemmed from my need to like live next to a park or some sort of green area. So I really wanted, especially like the view through the windows, to be like a lot of greenery rather than the urban environment and buildings, but the meadows would be an ideal location. I also really love the idea of an old Edinburgh apartment with all the beautiful ornamentation and the decor, the details and the cloisterings and the beautiful old windows. This was not like a must, but it was something that I would heavily appreciate in my flat. We also preferably wanted to have a living room in our flat. Again, this was kind of a thing that would depend on probably the size of the bedrooms and the kitchen. However, in an ideal scenario, we would like to have a living room area and not just like a hallway that kind of connects the rooms. And also something that I really appreciate is loads of natural lighting. I really wanted large windows with beautiful views and lots of natural sunlight. Now the final points were kind of things that would be very much appreciated, but definitely the location, the price, the room sizes, those were kind of like concrete things that we actually needed for our flat. So some of the things we were willing to compromise on depending on how many of the other points were fulfilled. And I feel like especially in a place like Edinburgh or any other big city really where the housing market is not good, you are going to have to like compromise on some aspects or other, and it is good to know what you absolutely need in your flat and what you're willing to compromise on before you actually start the flat search, and also communicate about it with your flatmates and see what they are expecting from the flat. Now something about our flat situation is that we initially wanted a 4-person flat. However, given the issue with HMO licenses and how they impact the cost of the flat, we decided against a 4-person flat and we ended up having a 2-person flat. However, the first few viewings are a 4-person flat since that is what we initially intended to have, and I still thought like the flat viewings were useful because they did end up influencing our final flat choice, and I also think they could just be beneficial for the purpose of this video. That being said, 4-person flats were just like out of our price range. The room per person for all of the 4-person flats we looked at were £650 per month at a bare minimum. Some of them were more expensive, and that was without utilities, so you'd have to like include at least £80 on top of that, I think, for utilities. So that was way out of our budget. And the 2-person flats that we had to look at, all of them were within the £500 range per person, so that was a lot more doable for us, and that was just like one of the main reasons why we ended up opting for a 2-person rather than a 4-person. So the first flat we had to look at was honestly one of my absolute favorites, and the location was ideal. It was like right in the middle of Old Town. It was about a 5-minute walk from our university building. It was also surrounded by a very good like shopping area, and it was also really close to the meadow, so right there in the middle. It was also just one of the beautiful old Edinburgh flats that I just absolutely fell in love with. All the cloisters and all the window decorations. The windows were huge and had absolutely beautiful views. All the bedrooms had lovely views, but especially the kitchen and living room area. The views through that were absolutely magnificent, and I just know that that had amazing natural sunlight. The bedrooms were all similar size, and the bathroom was pretty much the same size that we had in our student accommodation, and we had a 4-person flat and that worked just fine, so no issues with that. And honestly, it's just the location and the appearance of the apartment that absolutely sold me. However, the price was a pretty hefty one. The next flat we had to look at was in the Toll Cross area, so very close to the meadows. You could actually see bits of the meadows through the windows. Despite its proximity to the meadows, it was a lot more further out from our uni building. It would be around like a 15-minute walk at least. This again was a really beautiful old Edinburgh apartment. It had some of the beautiful ornamentation and cloistering that I absolutely loved. That being said, the first apartment did appeal to me more, just like aesthetically, and it was also a lot closer. However, this one was a close second. I absolutely loved this apartment and the things that it could offer, but again, we decided against this one. And then the third and final 4-person flat that we had to look at was definitely the most far out from all the flats that we looked at. It was in the Marchmont area, which honestly was initially kind of the area that I wanted to live in. Despite this one being around a 20-minute walk from our university building, this would be mostly a walk through the meadows, which is something I was definitely willing to compromise on. I absolutely loved the idea of walking through the meadows every single day to go to class. The interiors of the flat actually were not my favorite. It still had some of the features of beautiful old Edinburgh apartments. However, one thing that definitely stood out to us when we saw the videos online was the very jarring wallpaper that was present in all the bedrooms. It was kind of an eyesore. It wasn't as bad in person as it looked online. However, that was just like not our favorite part. I would have probably gotten some wallpaper to cover it up. The windows were just like out looking onto the meadows. This one had by far the nicest view of the meadows themselves. But a definite negative of this flat is the uneven room size. All the rooms were quite spacious. However, one of them was by far larger than the others, and it also had an ensuite, which probably made the price of the entire flat a lot more expensive, even though one person would probably only benefit from the bathroom. And this one was by far the most expensive one of all the flats that we saw, and for that very reason we just could not afford it. And it was also quite far out. Despite my absolute love for the meadows, it was not the best location for us. So this was the moment that we made the switch from a 4-person to a 2-person flat, and right then and there when we started looking for 2-person flats, they went down by about 100 to 150 pounds per person per month, which is a very, very big change for us. And that also kind of gave us a bit more elasticity with regards to what flat we chose, what location we chose, what sort of amenities we wanted to have in our flat. It generally just gave us a lot more flexibility. So the first flat from the 2-person ones that we had to look at was a Newington flat. And this was an area that I hadn't really looked at before. And I kind of regret that, because it has all the benefits of living in like the Bruntsfield, Marchmont area, of being close to the meadows, but because it's like on the opposite side of the meadows, you're a lot closer to some of the uni buildings. This particular building that we looked at unfortunately wasn't one of like the older buildings with the lovely interiors that I absolutely adore. This was definitely a lot more modern, which has its pluses. However, I wouldn't have some of the interior details that I absolutely loved. Despite being quite modern, it had really big windows, and they had really nice views out looking on some greenery and some trees that were kind of located in a central area of like the apartment complex. However, that was not the meadows. The meadows were quite close by, but it wasn't a view onto the meadows. The bedrooms were similarly sized. They had really nice big closets. They were quite spacious. They could be bigger. They were smaller than some of the Marchmont bedrooms, but they were just fine. And the flat also had a really nice living room area and also a kitchen, and those two were separated, but both of them were quite large. So this was a flat that we were definitely heavily considering, but we still wanted to see what was out there for other 2-person flats. Then we had a look at another Tollcross area flat, but this time a 2-person. And although the Tollcross flat we saw before I absolutely fell in love with, this one was a lot worse. This was definitely an old Edinburgh flat. However, it also looks like it hadn't really been taken care of for the last few years. One of the biggest downsides was just like how run down the flat itself was. For example, the floorboards were creaky and broken, and in certain bits they were just missing, and we could see inside them and they were kind of like black and charred. And honestly, we were quite worried that even something like mold could be an issue of that flat. Another definite negative of the flat was the fact that the bedrooms were not evenly spaced out. One of them was a lot bigger than the other, and even the bigger bedroom wasn't that big. It's just that the smaller one was absolutely tiny. It was like a corridor. The living room and kitchen area were nice and quite spacious. I personally didn't like the choice of decor and like the use of tiles in the kitchen, as they were quite colorful. Normally that would be something I'd be willing to like look past. However, all of our other issues with the flat before, we decided against this flat immediately. And additionally, even though I really loved the area of Toll Cross and the flat before because it was so close to the meadows, this flat was kind of located a bit more far out. So it was not only a bad location with regard to like our university, it was still like a 15-20 minute walk, but it was also a bit further out from the meadows. So it didn't have any of the benefits of living in Toll Cross in my eyes, but it had all the negatives of living so far out. So in general, this flat was just like a no for us. And then the sixth flat we had a viewing for was located right in the center of Old Town. Honestly, this again was not a location I really considered before, purely because of its near proximity to Cowgate and the Royal Mile, which I lived right by Cowgate last year and it was very loud. I kind of wanted to live in a little bit more of a quiet place. So that was why I really didn't consider that area. However, this location had the added benefit of being very central, but also being in a kind of enclosed residential area, so you don't really get the noise of Cowgate and the Royal Mile, but you're also very central. So that was a huge plus, as this was, I think, the closest or one of the closest flats to our university building. Secondly, I think the flat looked so much better in person than it did online. I honestly didn't have super high hopes going into the flat viewing after seeing the video and the photos online. However, I was very pleasantly surprised just by the beautiful interiors of the flat. It is definitely an old Edinburgh flat. It doesn't have all of the beautiful cloisters that I love. However, it still has its own like individual character that makes old Edinburgh flats special. My personal favorite part was the huge windows that kind of take up the entirety of one side of the flat. So you have a window in each of the bedrooms and then 3 in the living area, and all of them kind of outlook this beautiful courtyard with loads of greenery. And additionally, the flat was one of the cheapest ones that we'd found, and in general it just had such a good balance of quality to price, especially with regards to like the aspects that were important for us when finding a flat. The only real negative I could find about this flat was that the bedrooms could be bigger, like compared to some of the Marchmont and Brunsfield flats that I saw. The bedrooms were definitely smaller, however they were also bigger than some of the other flats that I saw. And considering the fact that the flat has quite a big living area, the living room is quite sizable and it's also separated from the kitchen. That wasn't that big of an issue, especially as it is a 2-person flat. And I don't know if I've just given it away or not, but that is indeed the flat that we went for. We had to be very quick with the whole application process. We applied and submitted our documents within an hour of coming back home from the viewing. The whole process moved really quickly, and within a few days we were paying the deposit and reading stacks upon stacks of papers. And then we signed the lease. We had to pay the full deposit and then 6 months rent, but the flat was ours. And it was a pretty daunting process in general. However, I'm really happy with the flat that we got. I think we're getting quite a lot given the current market for what we're paying, and it's just like such a lovely flat. I'm so excited to finally have our own flat rather than student accommodation. But I'll talk more about the flat itself and the moving process probably in like a move-in vlog or something. And finally, I wanted to get into some of my tips and tricks and just like things that I've learned throughout this whole process of finding a flat. And these are just things that I wish someone had told me before I started looking for a flat. So first of all is kind of a mistake we made, I guess, and that is make sure you know how many people you're living with. I feel like we did waste some time just looking for 4-person flats, going for viewings for 4-person flats when we could have been looking for 2-person. I'm not saying I regret that, because that does mean that we ended up with the flat that we did, and I really love our flat. However, we would have probably saved ourselves some time and stress if we just decided that ahead. So make sure to do your research and check how much prices differ from like a 2-person to a 4-person or whatever flats you're considering, and just make an educated choice and focus on that type of flat. And also just like be aware of the HMO licensing aspect and how that does make some flats more expensive. Personally, I think that a 2 or 3-person flat is ideal and is also like the easiest to find. We really struggled with our 4-person flats, and despite the fact that they were kind of expensive for us, we also didn't get any of the flats, even though we did make offers for some of them. So again, that is just something to take into account. Also, make sure you start looking early enough. I feel like we didn't do that. I feel like we started looking a bit too late. We started looking around mid-May and we had to move out of our accommodation in June. So honestly, you kind of have to decide from when you want to start renting, because initially we wanted to start renting in September, but we ended up renting in June just because of the way that the housing market currently is in Edinburgh. But you have to make that decision, and if you're planning on renting from June, definitely start looking even as early as March, in my opinion. Then when you finally decided what type of flat you're looking for, compile a list of them and just book a lot of viewings. Honestly, most people won't let you submit an application or submit an offer before you've done a viewing. And also when you're booking viewings, make sure to call them, as a lot of them allow you to just email. However, viewings get filled up really quickly, so by the time they actually get to your email, all the spots might be filled. That happened to me a lot. I was just emailing about flats, and I'm pretty sure I didn't get viewings for most of the flats that I emailed about, whereas when I actually called, I did get the majority of viewings. And in addition to that, respond really quickly. I did not realize just how fast-paced the housing market in Edinburgh is. You have to respond really quickly, which is kind of unfair because the letting agency probably won't be as quick to respond, but you have to be on top of it. Honestly, if you have to bring all of your documents to the viewing itself and just tell that you're willing to sign the documents right then and there, give them all of the documentations needed about your guarantors and stuff like that, just be on it, be ready. As I said, we responded within an hour of the viewing of the flat that we wanted, and I don't think we would have gotten it otherwise. Now, if you do decide that you don't want to start renting from June and you just want to start till September or something, make sure to give yourself 2 to 3 weeks to actually find the flat. I know that I said that the housing market is really fast-paced, however, it does take some time from when you actually book the viewing to when you actually do the viewing, sign all of your papers, and actually get the keys to your flat. So I think giving yourself around 2 to 3 weeks at least is definitely necessary before you find the flat. That's about the time that it took us to when we actually found our flat, and we also had to go through several different flats in between, so it does take some time, and it is definitely a bit of a time investment. However, I'd also say don't look for a flat too early on, as I've heard of several examples of people grouping up to live in a flat very early on, like first semester even, and then it just does not work out. So try to find a balance. I feel like mid-second semester is ideal. It's not too late, but you also are giving yourself enough time to kind of get to know the people and whether or not you want to commit to living with them for a year, if not longer. Also, sign up for as many viewings as you can. This will not only heighten your chances of finding your dream flat, but if anything, it kind of allows you to have a look at what's out there, kind of what price ranges actually get you in Edinburgh, what areas you should be looking for, what you like and what you don't like in certain flats. Make sure to always film and take loads of photos in the flats that you're viewing. First of all, if one of your flatmates cannot make it there to the viewing, or sometimes they only allow 2 people, so if you've got a larger group than that, then like some people won't be able to see the flat in person, make sure to have that just to show them. But also, if you're deciding between 2 different flats later on, it's so helpful to actually have photos and videos of when you were there rather than like the ones that are available on the internet, because as I said, those are not always great, and it's just like nice to look back at them to help you decide whether you'd like one flat or the other. And in addition to that, make sure to ask the person who's actually doing the viewing loads of questions. So whether it's about the trash, the utilities, the Wi-Fi, the windows, the glazing, etc., you have a right to know that. So be sure to come with a list. If you have any questions, make sure to ask them then and there, just so that there's not any surprises when you actually get to renting the flat. And then when you're almost decided, you're about to have your flat and you have all the documentation set, make sure you know everything you're allowed and not allowed to do, just so that you can get your deposit back when it comes to vacating the flat again. Just make sure to clearly read everything and reread it and double check everything. And then actually getting the flat itself, that's not all you have to worry about once you're actually moved in there, which is also quite a big hassle. You'll probably have to think of aspects such as council tax, Wi-Fi, utilities, furniture that the flat may be missing, even if it's fully furnished. Sometimes there's just like bits and pieces that you could use in the flat. Yeah, it's just really the starting point, but it's also such a cool adult move. I don't know, when I look at myself from a year before, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that this time I will have gone through the process of finding and renting a flat. It's just like such an adult move, and it's such a big responsibility, and you kind of have to go through it to actually like learn and realize the do's and don'ts of it. But it's also really cool that I'm able to make this adult move at this point in my life, and this was just a very big step for me. I hope that all of this was useful for someone. If you're currently searching for a flat to rent or about to do it, I wish you all the best, as it is quite a tedious process. You get rejected quite a lot, which is a very different type of rejection that I've ever experienced before. Even like getting rejected from schools and things, you take that very personally, I think. Whereas with a flat, there's really nothing you could have done really. It's usually just like the landlord choosing to have more money in some way. So I hope some of this was helpful in helping you choose your future flat. And if anything, you got to see some of the lovely flats that I got to view. I'm very, very grateful that I got to see some of them. It was not only lovely to get to see some of the views that some of the flats had, and also just like have a little sneak peek into other people's houses, as the flats that are up for viewings are usually ones with tenants still in them. But also I think that seeing all the flats that we saw before really cemented me in the idea that I'm really, really happy with the flat that we ended up getting. I think it really has all of the pros that we saw in other flats, but not many of the cons. So I'm very, very grateful and happy that this is the place that we'll be living in for the next year at least. And again, I hope this was helpful for someone currently searching for a flat or looking for the potential of a flat in Edinburgh in the future. The housing market here is definitely not easy, but it's also very doable. You will eventually find a flat somewhere, and I truly trust that you'll find a nice flat that you'll love. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!